What is up, everybody? I'm No Lex Given here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be picking up right where we left off in Saturday's video. So if you haven't seen that one already, go back and watch it. I'm going to be spoiling it a little bit. We're taking a look at my climb this season from rank 99 to infinite rank. And at the end of Saturday's video, we took an 8-cube loss to drop down to rank 98. So I'm hungry for some cubes right now. And this seems like a good enough opening hand that I'm going to go ahead and snap on turn 1. On turn 2, my opponent and I both play a Morbius, so I'm going to hit them up with the Spider-Man emote, though they've got Sunspot, so they're doing some stuff a little bit differently, but I really like this start because it's got Colleen Wing to discard and make a bunch of swarms at the start of the game, which is always very fun. Now, Shuri's Lab isn't a great location for discard decks. We don't play too many big cards. My opponent's Swordmaster here is one of the bigger cards that you can play. That doubles up to 12, but for the most part, Dracula, Morbius, those cards don't work super well in the lab, but we're both playing a discard deck, so I guess that part is a wash. And then on turn 4, I'm going to throw said Dracula into Nova Roma. Maybe we can add some additional power there down the line, but then we see what my opponent's up to. Colleen Wing discarding the Hulk. The Hulk was the cheapest card in my opponent's hand, so obviously they are playing more of a reanimator strategy as far as the discard stuff goes. So that definitely lets us know what's going on there. Turn 5, we don't have a great play for Lockjaw because there's only one extra space in Nova Roma. Lockjaw is just not good in Shuri's Lab because it's not going to double the card that the dog goes and fetches, and we can't play into the miniaturized lab. So I'm just going to throw Hell Cow into Shuri's Lab, double that up to 12, and then my opponent doesn't play anything. They just sink all of their power into Sunspot, and they snap. But I think we actually have them here. They're gonna play Hela into Shuri's Lab, but the important thing is that's only going to double Hela. It isn't going to double any of the cards that Hela reanimates. So I think about it for a second, and I think by throwing Chavez into this center location, that's gonna be a ton of power. My opponent winds up reanimating their Lady Sif and their Hulk, which will take Nova Roma, but our swarms will win the mini lab. And Chavez is going to be able to take a win in Shuri's Lab. So a really decisive 8-cube victory, and that brings us back up to rank 99. So that was really, really sweet. Just when you thought I was out, we are right back in it just as soon as we left. So yeah, that was nice to get back into it so quickly. We're going to take a look at a few games in this video, just every game that I played on my way from rank 99 up to rank 100. And this game has some interesting locations in it as well. Hala and Oscorp Tower both make things very difficult for Lockjaw. I don't want to throw Lockjaw in either of those locations, but I definitely want to throw Lockjaw into Muir Island. That's a great location for us because that's a location that I want to fill up anyways, and now we can fill it up with Lockjaws and swarms and that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and snap here on turn 3. That is looking pretty good for us, and my opponent is playing a Patriot deck. No shocker there. So after we saw that shocker on turn 2. On turn 4, we're going to draw Dracula, so I'll throw that into Oscorp Tower. Now that that's already triggered, we don't have to deal with that, and we'll worry about filling up Muir Island later in the game. With my opponent playing Patriot there, they're not really looking to battle in this location, and same thing with the Mystique. They're not really adding that much power into the Muir Island, so we can probably take it with just some slightly bigger cards later on, like on this turn. And Morbius is also a great draw for this turn. So now what we get to do is just throw Morbius into Hala, and then Colleen Wing and Blade are going to cycle through and discard a bunch of swarms for us. And then we'll be able to swarm the board next turn, as well as potentially discarding some more cards here. We are hoping to hit Chavez off of the Lockjaw. That will mean that we could potentially draw Apocalypse from our draw next turn and discard that to Dracula. So that is one other thing to potentially high roll with here. And Colleen Wing is going to go and fetch America Chavez. So that's really nice. Blade discards another swarm, so that's also pretty good for us. And that goes and gets Hell Cow, which discards 2 more swarms. So we actually fill our hand with swarms here, and we won't actually be able to draw anything for the turn because we already have 7 cards. So that part winds up being a little bit silly, but we're just going to go ahead and discard a bunch of swarms now. I'm really playing to win both Muir Island and Hala. Not really playing to win the Oscorp Tower, and my opponent plays all in for that second location by the looks of it. So they're definitely going to win location number 2, but we still have more power than them in all of the other locations, so this is going to be a pretty easy win. You'll also notice I keep a swarm in my hand just to be able to discard it to the Lady Sif, the Moon Knight off the Lockjaw, and then also this Blade, and then Dracula, and all of those are just going to feed even more power into our Morbius and ensure that we win that lane as well. But really sweet stuff here, and a 4-cube victory does a lot for us. That brings me up to 99.8. I am almost at infinite rank. We are super close. I'm going to show that off in a second here. 99.8, I just need 2 more cubes. So let's see how long that takes us to get 2 more cubes. We just need either myself or my opponent to snap in any of these games, followed by them retreating, or just a no-snap victory. Either of those will get us there. We see Sinister London as our first location in this next game. Sinister London is a super powerful location, but it's a super powerful location for a lot of decks. So my opponent is actually going to go ahead and snap on turn 2. That's a little bit scary, but I do actually like our start here. We could play things like Lady Sif into Sinister London, discarding Apoc a bunch of times, and then we could play Dracula and make 2 Draculas, both of which get to discard Apocalypse. So I think that we've got the makings of a really strong game right now. And my opponent is going to go ahead and play Black Widow and give us 2 Widow's Bites, which isn't really any more annoying than 1 Widow's Bite, so that's not too big of a deal, and actually it winds up being a lot better for us because we get to throw these Widow Bites into Lockjaw and grab some real cards from our deck. So I think this is going to be quite strong. The one thing that I do here is I will actually call these back and play everything into Onslaught Citadel. That does lose us some potential future space for Lockjaw, but I figured maybe this will hit into Morbius and that'll look pretty sweet. And then we'll still be able to win the other 2 locations with Dracula later on, creating an additional copy from Sinister London. So we'll see how that goes here. I am going to hit this end turn button and lock this in eventually. And our first Widow's Bite is going to go ahead and fetch us a Swarm. Okay, not great, but we get it out of the deck. And then the second one gives us Blade. And unfortunately, Blade discards Dracula. It was a chance I was taking there, and that means we're only going to get to play 1 Dracula this game, but we'll still get to play 2 Apocalypses, and they should still be absolutely huge and allow us to win the rest of the other 2 lanes here, even if my opponent plays a few more cards into the Citadel. 2 really interesting options here, either Hell Cow or Apocalypse. Either Hell Cow or Moon Knight, and I like the disruption of playing Moon Knight here and making my opponent potentially discard some key cards, and we get rid of their Shang-Chi, which is super useful. Now we don't have to worry about that wrecking us in the final turns of the game. My opponent plays a Carnage, which works pretty well into Sinister London, because then they'll get an even bigger Carnage at the next location, but now I'm just going to play Colleen Wing into Tinkerer's Workshop, and then that'll make Apocalypse into a 24 power card, and we'll be able to play 2 of them next turn. So that should be enough to lock up the game. I'm feeling pretty good about our chances here, but my opponent has one more cool trick up their sleeves. they're going to be playing Dr. Octopus, which takes my Apocalypse and puts it into play, which means that it won't generate an additional copy off of Sinister London. So I definitely win Sinister London, but it's going to be so easy for my opponent to win right now in Onslaught Citadel, and America Chavez doesn't quite take it in the Tinker's Workshop. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to retreat on this one, and my opponent plays it out, so we will be losing 2 cubes, and that's going to drop us down a little bit. So now we need 4 cubes again to hit infinite, but we are still really, really close. I do want to say these next 2 games aren't super exciting, so I'm going to talk over them a little bit, but I do have a lot more exciting games to showcase. I brought up that I've been playing a ton with this Dracula list, and I actually had too much footage to even go through. Well, I went through it, and I picked out the 10 best games, so that's what we are going to be looking at tomorrow. Maybe I'll even narrow it down a little bit further, like top 7 games, but these are all going to be games from my climb from rank 90 to rank 99. But I wanted to take a look at these games today because it's still the current season. I also just hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so I thought these games would be cool to celebrate all of that as well. This game does wind up, we do have pretty decent draws in this. We draw the Lockjaw and the Dracula, the 2 namesake cards in the deck, and then we do have Apocalypse, so we can discard that a whole bunch of times and still get some nice power out of that one. On turn 5, we've got a few different options. We can either go Hellcow plus Blade and just try to discard Apocalypse a whole bunch of times, or we could go Lady Sif plus like Colleen Wing. And the Colleen Wing's a little bit awkward because it just discards Blade. We could go also Lady Sif plus Blade. That's definitely an option here too. But ultimately I just go for the Hellcow just to try to discard more cards overall. And then it means when like these Hellcows or whatever loop through, then we have a decent chance of hitting Apocalypse yet again. Hellcow actually gets it on the first hit, which is nice, and then we discard Lady Sif. The other reason that I played it like this is I figured this gave us the highest chance of being able to play 2 discard cards next turn. So that was also kind of the idea here. Blade is going to discard Colleen Wing, and then that is going to fetch for us Moon Knight. And that'll discard a card from my opponent's hand as well as my Swordmaster. Not a huge Apocalypse for us here though, but we'll notice that my opponent didn't play anything this turn. So they are gearing up to just drop an Infinite, and if that's their plan, America Middle will actually win the game, because if they try to win Mojo World, they'll lose the other 2 locations. If they play in Wakanda, they still lose, regardless of where they play this Infinite, they would have lost the other 2 locations. So we're able to get a nice 2-cube victory, and then we're only 2 cubes away from hitting infinite again. So super, super close. This game I'm just gonna yada yada through. I will be honest, I was actually taking a phone call from my heart doctor while we were playing this game, so I was a little bit distracted, and these locations are super confusing. Starlight Citadel means that any location could become Warrior Falls, and Warrior Falls is not really a great one for this deck. And then Mindscape is actually a terrible location for a discard deck, because you either wind up giving your opponent your big Apocalypse that you spend all this time on throughout the entire game, or you give them a bunch of swarms. There are some cool games where you can give them nothing because you discard your whole hand, but ultimately it's just not going to work out with this Mindscape. My opponent's going to play a Yondu, and that hits America, so we won't even be able to draw that on turn 6, which is like something that you can kind of do with Mindscape. And then we draw Apocalypse, which is a terrible draw because now at this point we have to give an Apocalypse to our opponent. It's better to just not draw it at all. So when my opponent snaps, I'm just going to retreat and not worry about losing any more cubes. We will stay 3 cubes away from infinite as we move on to our final game right here. Final one for this video, up against Dragon Stout, and they already have the Wakandan card back, so they've already hit infinite for this season. But that doesn't mean they're gonna go easy on us. I'm making sure my do not disturb is on, so that way I don't get any more phone calls during this one. I had to take the previous one, obviously. But now our second location is going to be Bar Sinister, which wasn't the featured location yet, but can actually be really, really cool with this deck. I think previously I took a look at a game where I threw a Morbius into Bar Sinister, and that can go really well, but I was also thinking, what if you put Dracula into Bar Sinister? How sweet would that be? Location number 3 is going to be Oscorp Tower, and we draw Morbius, so I'm thinking about just Morbiusing into the bar or potentially the Dark Dimension, and I want to put Drac into Bar Sinister because we already have the Apocalypse as well. But Lockjaw can't really go super well into any of these locations. However, that said, I'm still going to throw it into the Dark Dimension because I think that we can play a bunch of discard spells on that final turn and do some sweet stuff with that. Now, I'm just going to throw Dracula into Bar Sinister this turn, and I'm going to go ahead and snap, so that way we are playing for the win. But my opponent is undisturbed, I don't know, they're unfazed. They're not phased by me dropping a bunch of Draculas into Bar Sinister, and that's because they have pretty big plans themselves. It's probably the thumbnail of this video. So there is, yeah, you're gonna know what's coming a little bit here. My opponent goes ahead and snaps back, and I'm still figuring out what I want to do this turn. If I want to play Colleen Wing to start to make some swarms, so that way I can throw those into the Lockjaw, that's ultimately going to be my plan. And then here comes my opponent with the quadruple Iron Man. So any power that they're able to add to these Iron Men is going to get multiplied by 16, 2, 4, 8, 16. So that is going to be a ton of power into Bar Sinister and super scary. But I think we've got a shot in both of the other lanes. Now, I don't know if my opponent is planning on clawing into Bar Sinister, or they could potentially already have a Cosmo and they are setting up to play a Destroyer into the Dark Dimension, or they could just be using Claw to add additional power into Bar Sinister. Either way, like, they would have to use Mr. Fantastic to then add some power to Bar Sinister as well from the Dark Dimension. But we are going to play Lady Sif first off to go ahead and discard Apocalypse. That's going to fetch Blade, which takes care of America. So now we are just discarding Apocalypse a whole bunch of times. We get rid of my opponent's Professor, and then we bring Apocalypse up to 16. And then Lady Sif will come back. That'll put APOC up to 20. And then the final Swarm is going to come in, and I assume discard Apocalypse one more time from Hell Cow. So now it's time to see what my opponent is up to. Colossus, Captain America, these are all ongoing cards, Warpath, and then, of course, Spectrum, giving all of those Iron Men +2, which puts them up to 128, plus they won in the Dark Dimension. Our Draculas are going to start discarding these APOCs, and wait a minute, because this math is super close. These APOCs get bigger every single time, 36 plus 40. That's going to mean that we win in Bar Sinister by 8 to get Infinite for this season. A really sweet final game. I was super happy with how all of this turned out, and a great game to finish off the season. That's gonna get me Infinite. There is the proof in the pudding right there. Really sweet one, and that's going to be it for me today. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I got some more sweet Marvel Snap content coming in the future. And if there's any Marvel Snap content that you want to see me play, feel free to recommend a deck in the comments below or on my Discord. But that's going to be it for me today. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lex Given. Peace.